Hey everyone, welcome to another Coturrnix Corner Live. I see we got quite a few people already in the chat room. Welcome to the show, you guys. We've got an excellent show lined up for you tonight. Our guest is Michael Rose from Southwest Gamebirds, and he is joining us to share with you how their commercial quail operation is run. And he's also going to be doing some talking about some genetics. We're also going to be having a question and answer session after we get done with all the stuff about the genetics and whatnot. The show is only going to run till 8 p.m. tonight, so make sure you get your questions in early so we can, try to get to all of them. And also, if you would do me a favor, type the letter Q in front of your question. That just kind of helps us pick out the comments from the questions or the questions from the comments. I do have a couple announcements that I'd like to do real quick before we get started. If you haven't noticed, I am not wearing my Coturrnix Corner Live t-shirts. I am wearing a New York Coturrnix t-shirt, which was sent to me by Kenny Mitchell. He has a YouTube channel also. It's called New York Coturrnix, and he also has a Facebook group page that goes by New York Coturrnix. So, guys, if you have t-shirts or any merchandise for your business or your farm or whatever, if you want to send in like a t-shirt, a cup, bottle caps, etc., each week I will grab one of them, wear it on the show, and give you guys a shout out on the show. Also, I'll let you know that we are officially booked through June, and our scheduled guests are next week, April 6th, is Zach Green from My Shire Farm. April 13th, we've got Chris Carnes from the very popular Slightly Redneck YouTube channel. April 20th is Nicole Ferrier from Sugar Feather Farm. April 27th is Ryan from Hatching Time. He's going to be talking about their cages and also a new incubator line that they've got coming out. May 4th, Zach joins us again from My Shire Farm. May 18th is Nicole Winkle, and she's going to be talking about quality over quantity. And then May 25th is Allie from Maine's Confetti Quail Farm. So that list is also posted on the Coturrnix Corner Facebook group page. So if you want to know who's going to be in here for what week. Also, we're going to be doing another giveaway tonight. The tumblers, let me bring them up real quick. I'm giving away one Coturrnix Corner tumbler to the person who asked the most engaging question of our guest, and we will select the winner at the end of the show and also make the announcement then. Also, Michael has donated 5 boxes of 30 count boxes of hatching eggs. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about that when he comes on here, and he's going to be selecting the 5 winners of that. So get your questions in, guys, and like I say, the most engaging questions for mine, and I guess the 5 that Michael's going to be choosing are the questions that he likes the most. Our moderator is Verna Young, and she kind of keeps things in order in the chat room. So Verna, thank you for joining us again today. I really appreciate your help. I guess that's about it. So with that, we will go ahead and get the show started. Okay, Michael, welcome to the show.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you would, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Southwest Gamebirds?
Sure. So I'm Michael. I run and own Southwest Gamebirds. I run it with my wife and a small team, and it's just a small farm. We have a big emphasis on quality and genetics. We love Coturrnix. That's our specialty, is Japanese quail, so that's all we do. And we've accumulated really what I think is an impressive collection of genetic lines and plumage colors and patterns, and we're excited to work with them and one by one release them on southwestgamebirds.com and make them available all over the world.
Okay, cool. Before we get too far into it, Michael, could you tell us a little bit about those 5 boxes of 30 counts that you're going to be giving away?
Yeah, yeah. So it's all from a recent import from Kai Pepler in Germany. We're calling it the German Sparkly Collection. It's got a gene that wasn't in the US previously called Sparkly. What that does is it adds a lot of contour and patterning to other colors. So you mix it with different genes, and it just really brings out unique patterns and different tones and hues in the feathers. And what we've been working with is over the last year is curing up different colors, finding out exactly what's in there and exactly how that gene affects the other plumage patterns that we're working with. We've kept the gene pool closed, so it's not mixed with anything else. It's just the German import from that breeder. And what we found is they produce a really nice sized bird, a consistent egg with a nice quality shell, and the temperament on these birds is just unbelievable. So they're a really pretty bird. They're fun to look at, fun to raise, and then they're great for kids as pets, and just really nice for 4-H projects and people who want to have just a small covey of birds. If you want to just have 5 or 10 birds and something really nice to look at, a little unusual, something you won't see at the local feed store, we really recommend these. They're great birds. So
Sure.
the 5 main color patterns that we've selected for that we have available now is pure sparkly. It's a deep brown bird that's homozygous, so it's purebred for the sparkly gene, and those will breed true time and time again. So that'll be the first one. We'll have a 30 count box of that we're giving away. And then the next 4 are, we're saying that they have an emphasis on a certain color. It's not 100% pure yet, but a lot of the specific color we've selected for. And so that'll be Pearl Fee Sparkly, Italian Sparkly, Falb Fee Sparkly, and Red Sparkly. This will be the 4 color emphasis boxes.
Cool. Sounds great. So you pretty much answered my next question, which is what varieties of Coturrnix are you currently keeping? So that was pretty much it.
So we touched on it. We've got probably 30 to 40 other bloodlines.
Wow.
A few of them are available on our website. A lot of them we're just keeping for research purposes. And the main thing we do is the production birds for James Murray Farms. And we help maintain 3 of his lines, the Jumbo Brown Meat Maker, the JMF Pharaoh, and the JMF Recessive White. So those are just 3 really good quality meat lines. And then, like I said, we're experimenting with a handful of others. We're seeing some mixed results, some really interesting potential, and we're excited about those.
Cool. I am going to go ahead and run those photos that you sent me, and if you want to talk a little bit about what's in the photos and just kind of explain, what we're looking at.
Okay. All right. So this is a really exciting time for our farm. I guess a brief backstory: we got our first quail in 2017. Started working with them then. Really liked them. I didn't particularly like my desk job. I thought it'd be more fun to raise quail. So we started really looking into the business case for quail, and I really liked it. Decided to start thinking about it a little more seriously. We got a hold of James Murray Farms, ended up doing his internship program in 2018, learning how to raise quail, learning all about proper breeding, bird selection, his lines in particular, what some of the limits of those were. So for instance, you don't just breed for size, or you can run into certain problems with knees and legs. So you keep them between 13 and 15 ounces instead of just going for as big as possible. Other health issues like that just weren't intuitive. We learned from Robbie there at James Murray Farms. Really great experience. He helped us out a lot, really set us on the right path from a breeding perspective. And then at the end of 2018, we dove all in. So quit my job entirely. We moved and we built this facility. So this is in Tonopah, Arizona. You can see in the background there on the left, some green structures.
Mm-hmm.
Those are temporary tents, and those have hundreds and hundreds of birds. I'm actually farming outside in Tonopah, Arizona, and it's the craziest thing I ever did. I don't know how we managed. We were up 24 hours a day some days. They were cool once the heat kicked in, putting fans on them, extension cords running everywhere. Um, it's not an experience I would wish on my worst enemy, but we made it through. We got our facility up, and it's just a beautiful facility. It does everything we need it to do. And in Arizona, the main thing we battle is heat. And so you can see in this picture, we're using a tunnel system. So what that is it's a wet wall. It's like a giant evaporative cooler.
Cool.
And that's an entire side of the building. So go to the next picture. We'll show you how it works. Those are big industrial fans. Those will
Nice.
actually create a wind tunnel in the entire building. So it's really cool. You stand in there. It could be 120 degrees outside, but in that building, it's 80 degrees and there's a nice cool breeze.
Wow.
So that's how we do it. That's how we take care of the birds. They lay all year long. They're happy as can be in there. We can control the light. We can control the temperature, and it's a really good environment for raising quail.
Mm-hmm.
That would be hatch day, my favorite day of the week. It never gets old. Pulling a tray out with a bunch of healthy little birds running around, and we hatch every week. So we're raising those things year round, replacing different lines at different times, trying to time it as best we can for spring when things get busy with all the production birds, and then play with all of our project lines in the off season. But this is a mixed hatch, and what we'll do is if a line is breeding true, we will hatch it in a tray with some other colors. If it's not breeding true, it gets its own tray. And what we want to do is keep those 100% separated so we never mix up genetic lines. It's like the end of the world for a breeder when a genetic line gets mixed up because it's almost impossible to fix. So there's certain things that you can't see for generations and generations. So if we have any inkling that got mixed that we can't unmix, the entire line gets cold. Those turn into meat birds. But something like this, you can see a pharaoh bird in the front, and then various other colors that we're familiar with behind it. Right after they hatch, they go in this brooder. This is a little box brooder I built myself. It's got big trays for feed. We line up the water on the front, and then if you go to the next picture, it'll show the heating elements, and those are spaced every couple of feet in the back. So there's a nice little temperature gradient from the back of that brooder to the front. The birds can control their temperature by themselves, but it doesn't stray too much from the ideal temperature of 95 degrees. At the coldest part of the brooder, I think it's about 90, and so they can go back and forth at will without getting too cold. Now you can see there's a lot of birds in there. They can't stay in there for long, so we move them into these pens once they're available. At 3 days, they know what food is, they know what water is, and they stand a much better chance of surviving in a big pen like this. If we put them in there on the first day, we might have trouble, but by day 3, they kind of know what they're doing, so we don't have very many losses that way.
Mm-hmm.
Next picture shows them a little bit older, and
go back to that
as you can imagine, so this is at 3 days,
Okay.
and they're not eating really quickly. They're learning to drink and they're running around, and they're pretty easy to manage at this age, but as you can imagine, once they're about a week old and start eating, they go through that food like crazy. So we put those feeders and those buckets on top of them. If you go to the next picture,
Oh yeah.
you can see how we keep them well supplied with food. And that's just a regular crumble. It falls down through that bucket, and the birds eat that. And we can see, because it's kind of a translucent bucket when they're getting low, and then top off those buckets, keep them well fed. And then in the next picture, I believe we've removed those brooders. So we use kind of a hover Ohio-style brooder, and then when they're about 3 or 4 weeks old, that brooder comes out. The birds use all the square footage in that pen. They muck it all up fairly evenly, and that'll last them 6 weeks. A good clean layer of pine shavings works great here in Arizona. The temperature is fairly high and the air is dry, so it's easy to keep them dry. And if they stay dry, they stay pretty clean in there.
What's the dimensions of each one of these enclosures?
So they're a little different. I think the one in that picture there is 8 or 9 feet by 15 feet.
Oh, okay, nice.
We've got some that are a little bigger, some that are a little smaller. Just how large of a batch we're raising that week.
Right.
And once they hit 6 weeks, what we'll do is we'll either sell them locally, sell them nationwide. We'll ship the adult quail, or we will put them in these cages, and those will be our breeders. So these are some new breeders. We put them in just a standard cage with the 1x2 wire and then the vinyl coated wire on the floor for their feet. Um, they've got the same nipple system for watering. It's all automatic, so they can reach out there and drink as much as they want. Again, really important in Arizona. If we have some event where we lose power or lose water, it could be catastrophic. So
Right.
it's really important for us to keep an eye on the water, make sure they've always got access to it, and again, fight the heat, keep the temperature down for them.
Right. Oh, what is this?
Those are our new boxes.
I love them.
So we just designed those and started using them. We sent out a few of them this week, and we sent one to you last week, Terry. You were our guinea pig.
Yes, you did.
And my hope was that the eggs will turn out a little better if we ship them in these. We put a lot of thought into the design. We made sure the sides are fairly secure. All 8 corners of the box have a little bit of a buffer, and we chose a corrugate that's crush proof or crush resistant. So really, we thought about every aspect we could going into these boxes. And then the design, our hope is the post office employees will be a little nicer if they see a pretty box instead of what they tend to do with the regular boxes. And I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah,
all the
mine
issues
showed
that
up in perfect
we can have.
condition. I mean, the box was immaculate when it got here.
Perfect. Well, that's exactly what we're going for. So hopefully that trend continues.
Yeah. No, that was great. One thing I did want to mention to you, Michael, I don't know, it seems like when you lean in towards the camera, your mic's attenuating a little bit. So if you can, just try not to lean in and out. I don't know why it does that, but it seems to do that. Can you talk a little bit about the German Sparkly?
Sure. So the German Sparklies were imported from Kaipepler in Germany. He's an excellent breeder. He's got a huge collection of Coturrnix, and he's done a really great job with them. I believe you had him on your show before.
I did.
And we've been amazed by the German Sparkly birds. We hatched them out. They hatched fairly well from shipped eggs, and then the first thing we noticed was they weren't dying in the brooder. So with our production lines, you'll see around 5% mortality with our setup over the first week or so. And I don't think I saw more than 1 or 2 lost that entire first week. And then we said, wow, these are really hardy birds. Nice and healthy, all running around, no birth defects, no deformities that we noticed. And so that was my first impression of these things. Then I pulled them out when they were 6 to 8 weeks old, and we noticed almost every variety had true jumbos in it. We were getting 300, 325, 350 gram birds, and some that were a little bit higher. I think we had some upwards of 400 grams. And so that's phenomenal. So we're going to pick all the biggest ones. We're going to select for size and overall health, and raise these just like all of our production lines that we and I think that's paying off. We're seeing some really nice size on some of the old classic colors that we had in the US. I got a 15-ounce pearl fee a couple months ago.
Wow.
And we've seen some nice size lens, nice size fouled fees. So our goal is to just release each of those one by one as a true jumbo once the color is 100% pure. But for right now, we're releasing the whole collection. We noticed over 30 different plumage patterns when we initially looked at these. And none of the genes are new except for Sparkly to the US. But there's some interesting interactions that we've seen where you get something that if you're not familiar with it, you'd have no idea what the bird is. You wouldn't even know how to sex it.
Right.
So sparkly with Phi in heterozygous form, where there's only one copy of it, actually produces peach tones on some of the ventral plumage. And I saw that, and I had no idea what I was looking at. So we had to test breed each of those. We had to work with other breeders overseas to figure out what these were, because those genetics have been in the UK and Australia and Germany for a while now. So some of those breeders were a lot more familiar with them. So they were able to tell me what I was looking at.
Right.
But we've got them in 5 or 6 different groups now, where we're doing an emphasis on that specific color. And then we've also got some mixed cages that we're just selecting for size to try and keep some of that size and the egg potential going as well. So we're selecting for both of those things simultaneously. It's just a really exciting project. And then the other thing that we noticed that's really unique from a plumage perspective is the interaction with roux. And normally in the US, when we see roux, you get Egyptian, you might get red range, scarlet, autumn amber. But with the sparkly collection, we see all of those and they have more of an orange hue. So it just looks like a completely different bird, but it acts the same way genetically. So it's a little bit of a mystery to them. Cool. There's a lot more to be learned about that collection, and I'm sure if we talk in a year or two, it'll be just as exciting because there's a lot in there.
Right. Speaking of genetics, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the Plumage Genetics webpage that you've got, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
All right, so this is on our website. It's on southwestgamebirds.com. It's right at the top menu there. It says Plumage Genetics in the green menu bar at the top, or you can search southwestgamebirds.com/genetics. And what we've done is we've tried to take each gene and explain the different color variety that you get from them. And it's a little bit of a work in progress. So if you see a typo or something, we'll get it fixed. But I wanted to release this today so we could go through it all. A lot of people have been asking for something like this, and we keep hearing other breeders say they're going to do it. So we had put it off, and we finally said no more. Let's give it a shot and see how people like it. But what we did there at the top, each of those little boxes is a drop down, and the one that's probably the most interesting is the helpful definitions. If you're new to genetics, this page might be a little bit dense. But if something doesn't make sense, just go up there, and all the big words have a quick, easy to understand definition, hopefully, so that can be useful for someone who has advanced knowledge of genetics, or somebody who has never even read the first thing about genetics, if they want to get kind of a crash course, and so that they can start learning what they're raising, what they can breed to what, to get what. Hopefully that's thorough and has everything that you need.
Okay.
So to start, a few definitions I'll just go over real briefly.
Go back up here?
No, you can scroll down.
Okay.
We'll look at that one first. So wild type is what a bird would look like in its natural state in the wild. It's absent any mutations. It's just the most common genetics for that species is going to result in the wild type. So we often hear this called wild or pharaoh, and we're going to call it pharaoh because technically that's more correct, because a jumbo pharaoh is not really a wild type bird. A wild type bird would be small, it would be flighty, it would brood its eggs, but a pharaoh bird is the wild type color. And so if we're just talking about plumage genetics, that's the term we would use. So that's a pharaoh pair. It's a pharaoh hen and a pharaoh male. And then we've got some pictures of the feathers, like you have pulled up there, and then a brief description of it. But if you scroll down to the first one, we're calling them monogenic phenotypes. A phenotype is the visible characteristics of a bird. And then monogenic just means there's only one gene that we're working with. So if we started doing polygenic phenotypes, this list would be a million miles long. So we're starting with the simple, and then we'll add some of the more common polygenic varieties later. Some things like, pearl fee, growl fee, some of the really common ones that have names. And we'll probably stick to that. I don't know if we want to get into the unnamed varieties because it's just a rabbit hole and we'll never end. But now these are all colors that you can get that only have one mutation. So the mutation we've got first is fawn, and then on each of them we listed the mutation responsible for the variety. We listed the locus, which is the location of that mutation on the genome, and then the gene that it's affecting. So this first one, fawn, affects the ASIP gene, and ASIP is a protein that would normally be produced. And what happens with fawn is it actually overproduces a certain portion of that protein. It's my understanding. If you were to destroy that gene, the bird couldn't survive. So there's another mutation on that same gene called lethal yellow, where if you have one copy, which is heterozygous, 2 copies of the gene would be homozygous. And because the yellow gene is lethal, 2 copies would completely deactivate the gene, so the bird can't survive. Whereas 1 copy would just affect the plumage, and in the case of yellow, because it's a large deletion of that gene, it would also affect the health and size and whatnot of the bird. Fortunately, that's not in public circulation. What we deal with is fawn, and it does a real similar thing to the plumage, but because it's an overexpression of that protein instead of an underexpression, it won't affect the health of the bird, it won't affect the size. So you can have purebred jumbo golden Manchurians, and they'll be healthy as can be. You don't have to worry about that lethality. But that's what fawn does. It'll create golden Manchurian and it'll create Italian, based on whether there's 1 copy of that gene or 2. So you're looking at a nice Italian right there. And those are it's a really common mutation. It's a really pretty bird. A lot of folks using those, and we like them a lot. So go ahead and scroll to the next one. So this is another, it's another gene that has 2 colors that it can create. Actually more colors, but this particular mutation on the gene will create 2. So it's extended brown. It's very common. The locus is actually named after it. So it's the E locus, or the extended brown locus, on the MC1R gene. And what you get with 1 copy is actually right below that, the Rosetta. And it's a partial expression of it. And with 2 copies, it's Tibetan, which is the one that was right above that. So just a easy representation of that. 2 really beautiful birds, nice and dark, and that gene interacts with all kinds of dilutions, all kinds of other colors. But this is what a simple or no other mutation would produce a Rosetta or Tibetan.
Okay.
So down to the next one. This is the same gene, but a different mutation. This is pansy. It's also called redhead. In German, it's called Rottkopf. So you hear that a lot online. Those are all the same thing. And it's just a completely different plumage pattern from a completely different mutation. This one is recessive. So there's only 1 phenotype, which is a purebred pansy, which has homozygous pansy. So whenever you see this and you put it with another one, it's going to breed true, absent any other recessive genes that are hiding there. So it's one of my favorites. It doesn't seem to affect the size or anything of the bird. And we're working on a jumbo pansy line right now as well.
Nice.
So onto the new one. This is Sparkly on a pharaoh bird. So all this has is 1 copy of Sparkly. And you can see it sort of looks like a pharaoh bird, the male on the left, the female on the right, but there's just a lot more pattern on it. So the spots and speckles on the female go all the way down to the feet almost. And then the male, instead of being that solid copper color, has kind of a diamond-like pattern. So it's still more copper than the female. It's got that copper plumage, but there's a pattern to it. So it's actually darker on some parts of the feather and lighter on others. The next one is what a purebred sparkly would look like. So that's one of the boxes that we're giving away, is purebred sparkly. It's homozygous sparkly. If you breed those to each other, all you're ever going to get is sparkly. Um, really pretty bird. It looks almost like a Rosetta, and we suspect that the mutation is actually on the same gene because it affects the plumage in a similar way, and it has partial expression when it's heterozygous and full expression when it's homozygous. It just has a lot in common with the other MC1R mutations. All right, here's a really common one. It's dotted white. This is used in the Texas A&M line. It's used in the JMF jumbo white line, and it's just a beautiful bird. We like dotted white. It's a fun color to work with. You can do a lot with it. You can breed them to be almost entirely white. Some will come out without a single colored feather on them. Some will come out with color all over, but you'll have spots on the back or spots near the tail. But a classic dotted white is just going to have that small dime-sized spot on the back of its head, and the rest of the plumage will be completely white. A little bit of debate over the inheritance. Typically, it's been called a recessive gene. All the literature calls it recessive, but we've seen otherwise. We've seen carriers of dotted white that have some white primaries or a little bit of white on the neck, which would suggest that it's actually codominant, but it's mostly recessive. You're not going to get a tuxedo bird when you have dotted white on Pharaoh. You're going to get something like that. If you mix it with extended brown, that's when you start to see that interesting interaction between the two genes, and you get all the tuxedo variants.
Cool.
So that right there is kind of the progression of the gene if you have one copy or two or three. So we've labeled all those pictures. So if you expand them like you've been doing, Terry, then you can read a label. If it's someone else's picture, we've given them credit there. You can on that. And we've also described it. And if there's multiple birds, we'll name it from left to right or from top to bottom, whatever it is. So that was Panda that you were just on. It's not very common, but it is available from various breeders. Real similar to dotted white, but a larger spot of plumage that'll show the underlying plumage. Next one down is white-winged pied. Really popular right now. It's fairly new, and it's got a lot of imposters. So what you see is some folks selling the heterozygous dotted white, where it just has a couple white primaries, as white-winged pied. And they're not the same thing. White-winged pied is going to look like the picture there. It's going to have an entire white wing, not just flight feathers. The whole rest of the bird will be white. And then this one's not ideal. Ideally, the entire head would be white as well. So if you scroll through those pictures, I think there's one that's actually a little bit better from Yardley. That one right there. See if the next picture has a view from the back. There we go. You can see that white collar around the back of the neck.
Yep.
That's really what a white-winged pied should look like. Ideally, the entire head could be white, and it would just have colored plumage on the back and shoulders and tail. Those will breed true. If you breed those together, you're not going to get any white birds. You're going to get just white-winged pied, and you can do that with any other dilution or underlying plumage color. So you could have white-winged pied Tibetan. You could have white-winged pied golden. It's a really fun one to work with.
Cool.
So next is Andalusian. We get this thanks to Perry Schofield. It's a really interesting gene. It's not terribly well, but it's responsible for silver and Andalusian. You can see silver on the bottom of your screen there. Silver behaves a little bit more consistently. You get white primaries and then silver plumage. Andalusian is a little less consistent. You get more colored plumage. You get partial expression where there's some undiluted plumage and some fully diluted plumage. But they are very similar mutations. They're both on the MITF gene. It's at the Me locus. And if you have a heterozygous bird then you see what's pictured there, and that's the classic silver or Andalusian bird. If you have a homozygous bird, this particular mutation has some issues with size, with health, and longevity. Um, I don't recommend breeding purebred Andalusian or purebred silver. You'll get an off-white bird. It won't live very long. It won't be terribly healthy. Um, there's work to be done with this mutation. If it's outcrossed enough to health stock, that may change, but right now, from what I'm aware of, uh, it's kind of sad. The birds just won't live terribly long. A lot of
Right.
times they'll be really friendly, so it just makes it that much more sad when you lose them at an early age. But we work with mostly heterozygous, so they look just like the birds in those pictures. All right, next is blue, or sorry, lavender. Um, Not very common in the US, but it's been around for a long time. It's that bird there on the right that's very diluted. Um, and it interacts with other colors and other patterns as well. I think they're really pretty. Um, it's recessive, so it's a little hard to find. It can hide for generations and then come out. But if you have a whole cage of lavenders, it should always produce lavenders. That's how every recessive gene works.
Okay.
Next is blue. Blue is very common in the US. It's usually mixed with other colors. So on Pharaoh, you can barely see it. It still shows a lot of brown. Whereas if you mix it with fawn or you mix it with extended brown, you get some really interesting expression of color. A lot of times you'll see two different tones based on whether it's heterozygous or homozygous. You'll get like a dark gray versus a light gray. So it's a fun bird to work with. In homozygous form, it will breed true. So you can get like a steel blue Tibetan looking bird, like a dark gruffy, without the pattern. And that's a classic blue with extended brown that would breed true. We haven't worked with these personally, but I've heard lots of interesting things about them. I think it'd be a fun one to get. Next is Egyptian. This is very common in the US. It's sex-linked recessive, so it will hide in the hens. It will hide in the males. It'll always show if the hens carry it. So this one has plagued some of the production lines. Some farms that are trying to make a certain color breed true, we'll see this one popping out once in a while if they haven't bred it out properly. But if you breed an Egyptian to an Egyptian, you're always going to get Egyptian. We have these available on our website. We've never seen one not breed true. And you can do sex-linked breeder colonies with them, and that way you can tell what gender the birds are when they hatch. So it's a really useful mutation, and in other countries it's used at massive production levels to raise point-of-lay hens. The next one is one that is extremely common all over the world, but nobody knows they have it. And it's because it really looks very similar to Pharaoh. This is the brown mutation. Colloquially, jumbo brown production birds are called jumbo browns, and they may have this, they may not. So for instance, the James Murray Farms meat makers are a mixture of brown and Pharaoh. So some of them will come out looking like the bird on the right, which is Pharaoh, and some will come out looking like the bird on the left, which is brown. But this gene acts exactly like Rue. It's on the same gene. It's sex-linked recessive, and you'll usually see it in your hens. So if you order production birds from us, you'll see a whole bunch of hens hatch out brown, and you'll see a good portion of the males hatch out brown as well. But I'd say about half of the birds, a fourth of the birds will hatch out Pharaoh from the males, and then a good portion of the hens as well. That's a hen side by side, Pharaoh on the right, brown on the left, and you can just see when it's in the light box there, it's much more obvious. It's just diluted and it's more brown. Mm-hmm. So on the face, you get that cream color, whereas on the Pharaoh, it's a much more contrasting white plumage almost and dark brown versus the light brown and dark brown on the brown bird. The brown tones carry all the way under the belly as well. And then the feathers, you can barely see the difference. That's actually a brown male on the left, a brown female on the right. I don't know if I have a feather comparison picture,
Right.
but we'll have to add one eventually.
I can see
Next one on the
everybody's going to be
list.
going out and checking their birds to see if they've got
Yeah.
browns or the pharaohs.
Well, we always encourage that because some people are interested in colors and they may not know they already have one.
Right.
So it's a fun one to play with. And if you pure up Pharaoh, you can see different tones when you mix them with the other colors. So it does come through with all the other varieties.
Right.
So the one you're looking at right now is cinnamon. That one's been around forever, but it's not very common. And the reason for that is it's actually very difficult to raise. So cinnamon comes out fragile. It's born with red eyes. It's heavily diluted, and it's just not a very hardy bird. Once it's raised, that all goes away from our experience. So that's a 6-week hen that we just raised, and she's doing great. She's a nice, big, meaty hen, and very healthy. The cinnamon gene is on the albino locus, so it's very similar to albino and it's hatching out with the red eyes. There's actually 3 mutations on that locus that we know of. Albino, which fully dilutes to white with red eyes, cinnamon, which partially dilutes, like the picture there, and then another mutation called ghost, which is kind of in between the two. I don't think that's available in the US. I don't even know if it's in public circulation, to be honest.
Right.
And then albino we didn't include on this page either. It's just so rare, hardly anyone has it. But we did want to put cinnamon on there because we'll actually be selling those soon, and they're getting more popular.
Cool.
Next one is arguably new to the US. However, there's a little bit of an interesting history on it. We actually pulled calico out from our pearl tree birds. So these ones were from a German import, I believe, and that's just calico with no other mutations. But we've actually pulled it out of our pearl fees as well, so we'll be offering fee calico in the near future, as well as regular calico, like in the picture there. Calico it's not clear what gene it's on. We haven't done extensive study. We don't know anyone who has, to see if it's interacts with any other alleles. You usually test for allelism, which is how you tell what location on the genome the mutation is. But we don't know anything about the location of this one. We just know that it affects the plumage a little bit and the pattern a lot, and they're really pretty. So we haven't seen it interact with anything else. It may be a completely novel location on the genome so that it can interact with everything.
Mm-hmm.
But time will tell. When we learn more, we'll update that. Here's another one that was discovered not too long ago. It's Falbfee. I believe this was initially pulled out of the German pastel collection by Kansas City Quail Farm. And in my opinion, this is the strongest diluter. It dilutes all color on the bird, and it leaves basically a grayscale version of the bird. So all the black stays just as dark, but all the color just disappears. So really interesting to breed this with other colors. And one of the other interesting things about it is it's incomplete dominant. So what you'll see is partial expression when you first mix it with another color, and then full expression once it's purebred. So next one, historically this has been in Australia, and it's called Sandy. It's just a different diluter. So it's interesting that this one is sex-linked dominant, so it has a different mode of inheritance. It means it's on one of the sex chromosomes, and it interacts with other colors in a really unique way as well. So in Australia, they mix it with fawn, and they've got their own version of pearl fee, but instead of being black and white, it's black and orange. So
Wow.
really interesting. It's not intuitive how it interacts with other colors, so we'll just have to mix it with everything and see what pops out.
Right. I like this next one.
The next one, the Oz Dilute.
Yep.
Oz Dilute is another dilution from Australia, hence the name. And I believe it's on a different locus than Sandy because it's recessive, so it's not inherited the same way. But completely different diluter. We don't know much else about it except that it's not anything we knew about before. So it's might get a new name eventually, but I think this is the most recently discovered dilution mutation
Right.
um, that we know of. So that's the list. That's what's available in the United States, and eventually we'll add to this page with all the colors that are the results of more than one gene. But that'll be a project. So hopefully you all find this useful. It was certainly a lot of work,
Sure, it's
and
amazing.
you know, full caveat. It's I'm flawed. Mistakes. We'll do our best to correct them, but to my knowledge, it's as accurate as I can make it.
Sure. No, that was. I don't understand half of what you said, but it was amazing.
All
So,
right. Well, apologies there. It's a
nope.
little dense. I come from a biochemistry background,
I,
so
I was going to ask you
we
where
kind of
you
take that
learned all
approach.
that.
Yep. So I loved genetics in college. Almost went into that, and had no idea I'd be quail farming later, or maybe I would have.
Right. Cool. We are running a little late. It's 7:45 now. Can you stick around for a little while, and we'll go ahead
Yep.
and take some of these questions?
Sure.
And don't forget that you need to pick 5 of your favorites for the hatching eggs, and I will pick one
Okay.
for the cup.
Awesome.
All right, let me get down to some of these questions here. You guys, if you want to ask a question, make sure that you post or type the letter Q in front of your question, so I can kind of get through these a little bit quicker. Let's see. Where are we at? Here we go. Van says, I'm having issues maintaining humidity in my brooder I built from your plans. Any suggestions? I have a large water pan in the bottom. Make sure, if you follow the instructions on the incubator according to the video, just make sure that you don't have any leakage around the door. A lot of times I see people are using the wrong fans. They got too much air circulation, which dries out the air. So, yeah, check around your door. Maybe close off some of your vents. Some people have actually put a pan of water up by the light bulbs, and the air blowing across, or the fans blowing across that water brings it up a little bit. Let's see. Kevin says, my quail have not laid eggs in 3 weeks. Any idea why? These are yours, Michael.
This one's mine. We get this question a lot. The most common things are light and stress. So make sure they've got ample light.
Okay.
Sorry, it froze up a bit. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, make sure they've got ample light. To lay, quail like to have red light. So either give them full spectrum light or red light at least 14 to 16 hours a day, and then make sure they're not stressed out. Quail are a flight animal. They're not a prey animal. So, or sorry, they are an animal. So things that would stress a person out aren't what's going to stress a quail out. Things that are going to stress a quail out aren't what's going to stress a person out. So if you've got a household cat that likes to walk around your quail cage, you might not think anything of it. Your cat might not think anything of it, but this quail might be terrified.
Yep.
So things like that, they might not show that they're scared, but if they're a little bit stressed, they'll stop laying eggs right away. So that's the idea. Give them a nice, peaceful environment, and then give them lots of food and water and lots of light.
Yep. Okay, Katrina says, if you could design a maintenance and emergency kit for new quail owner, what would be in it?
Maintenance and emergency. I know for us, we're always paranoid about power outages and losing water. So I would say it wouldn't really go in a kit, but make sure you've got redundancy built into your operation. And then make sure you've got food and water enough to last several weeks if your feed store is out or something happens. And then if you want to give your quail veterinary care or medical care, um, there's a liquid Band-Aid. It's like an aluminum spray you can spray on wounds, and we recommend that. And then VetRx is great homeopathic care. Um, Antibiotics, I can't recommend any. Personally, we don't use them normally when quail get that far gone. We just remove them from the breeding program. But there are certain drugs that you can use as well if your quail are sick. But those are the big ones I'd include. Something for wound care. If they get scalped, have an extra cage on hand that you can put them in to heal up. Things like that.
Okay, Claire says, do you have any quail kept outdoors? If so, what floor covering do you use?
So we don't currently, but as you saw in that picture earlier, we used to. And we actually used to have our entire farm outdoors. So we kept some quail in cages outdoors on a wire floor, and then we kept others on the ground in a predator-proof enclosure with a good layer of clean pine shavings.
Okay. Joel says, how do you identify the bully in the cage?
You got to look for them. So the interesting thing is there's lots that you can do to help a peaceful line of quail not have issues with cannibalism. Normally, quail don't have bullies, but there are exceptions, and sometimes you just have to remove them. Quail have an interesting pecking order. It's really similar to chickens. But if you think about dominance hierarchy with quail, and you see a bully, that bully has worked his way up to the top to become a bully, or he's near the top, and that's why he's picking on everyone. So if it's actual true aggression, it's not hunger or breeding behavior, but true aggression, there's things you can do to remove the male, for instance, for 48 hours to 72 hours, and then reintroduce him with several other males. He'll be at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy. So it'll take actually an enormous amount of energy for him to work his way back to the top. And a lot of times that in itself will be exhausting to the bird, and he'll settle for second or third place. And so then the aggression will be removed. But the simplest thing is just to remove him if you see him. If he's a really special bird, then you can through great lengths to just kinds of tips and tricks to get him to be peaceful with his neighbors.
Right. Quail Ma'am says, what are your favorite colors and patterns?
See if I can. I really like Grouthy. I like seeing how dark it can become. It's just a nice dark slate gray when it's purebred. I like that color a lot. I really like Calico. And then I like Andalusian. It's one of those where you never get the same bird twice. So it makes breeding for something a little more difficult, a little trickier. But I like working with those a lot. And cinnamon. I'll give you 4. Cinnamon's just really pretty. I've never worked with it until recently, and it's been really rewarding to see a fragile bird grow up into a robust adult. And I just love the color. It reminds me of porcelain, the different gray and light brown tones on the feathers.
Right. Big Rig Cook says, hello, I'm just getting into quail raising. I just bought 2 little giant incubators. Could you please tell me where I can buy my first hatching eggs from?
Well, you can buy them from us.
Exactly.
No, there's a lot of good farms out there. I would make sure you look for a breeder who's MPIP certified. Make sure they're allowed to ship, and that also shows that they're inspected. And then ask people who they bought from and if they had a good experience or not.
Right. Matthew says, how long does it take to develop a new colored / pattern and prepare to be able to offer it to the public at scale?
That's a great question. It can take anywhere from 8 weeks to 2 years. So it's it's about 10 weeks from egg to egg if you do everything right. And so you can get it up that quick. So I guess 8 weeks to, or sorry, 10 weeks to a year. If you need to do multiple generations, if something is not purebred and you need to remove certain genes, you may have to spend an additional 10 weeks tracking each male or each bird and seeing who's throwing what. We have heard horror stories where something comes out from a specific combination after the second or third generation. So it really depends, but most color genetics that we've seen are very simple inheritance. You can put them up in about 10 weeks.
Okay. Letty Torres says, how many quail can you put in a 2 foot by 4 foot cage?
Oh, it's a loaded question. Everyone's got a different opinion on that. So
Do you have a square foot, number of birds per square foot that you look at, or not
yeah,
really?
so we do 4 birds per square foot. It's what the USDA recommends. Um, if you keep them cold and clean and well fed so they don't fight, you can pack them in a little tighter. I've heard of people doing 5 birds a square foot. I don't really recommend it, but if you get down to lower square footages, like 1 bird per square foot, you can actually have aggression issues pop up. So I'd say keep it around 4 birds a square foot, down to as little as one, but I wouldn't recommend either of the extremes. I wouldn't go to 5. I wouldn't go to
Okay.
1 or lower. I keep it between those.
Okay, Robbie says, what would be the difference in genetics between the German line and the American line, and what creates the different patterns?
It'll depend on the line. So there's actually a lot of different German lines, a lot of different American lines, and those are independent from the color genetics, which create the patterns. So uh, it's not really a straight answer. It'll depend on which line. If there's different traits that are different, or you can put into any line. So it's there's not really a, if you say, for instance, a Graufi line, like the Southwest Gamebirds Graufi line, not that it's really a line yet, it's a genetic strain right now. That would be specific to us and the specific population of birds that we have in that line. Whereas Graufi in general could be from anyone and anywhere. The differences are endless.
Okay. If you notice, Michael, if you notice yourself freezing, just keep talking. We can hear you fine, but I'm getting a little bit of glitchiness in our images here.
Okay.
Let's see. The La Rochelle Farm says, can you tell me as much as possible about your fab fee, where from, size, breed true, etc.?
So our fob fee is originally from the German pastel collection from Kansas City Quail Farm. And I'm not exactly sure what else has been mixed into that, because we did get them as mixed birds from James Marie Farms originally. And then we got others from Kansas City Quail Farm. And this is years ago. We've since selected for the birds we thought were the healthiest. We're working with a second fouled feline that's jumbo from the German Sparkly collection, so we know a little bit more about them, what breeder they're from, the history, what exact genetics are in that. But the ones we have for sale on our website, it's just the color, and I would just call it a genetic strain. I wouldn't even call it our fouled feline, because it has not been tried and true for different qualities such as egg size, meat size. We have a really high standard for something that we call a genetic line.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think most of the colors that we offer or that exist in the US for that matter are true genetic lines. They're really just genetic strains that have been selected for color for a generation or two.
Right.
But if you're into colors, all of them produce eggs at 6 to 8 weeks, and they're all very fertile. They're nice birds, and they're fun to raise. So if you don't need peak production like a commercial farm might, go for the colors. They're more fun to raise.
Okay. Marius says, what is your opinion on the English white, aka Texas A&M?
So English white's just a color. My opinion on Texas A&M is if you purchased them, the breeder was probably being dishonest with you because Texas A&M is really, really hard to find. What you probably have is just a jumbo bird that happens to be dotted white. Texas A&Ms were developed in the 70s. They haven't been maintained particularly well. They were known to be aggressive. They were a nice sized bird, but they had aggression issues. And what's happened is James Marie Farms developed a second dotted white line. And that one's actually used at a lot of commercial farms now. It's very common all over the US. So if you have big white birds, they probably came from that line or they're closely related to it. And they're going to be just like regular jumbo browns, except they're white. So if it's a nice, docile, fat, healthy looking bird, I love them. Dotted whites are great birds.
Okay. Verna says, what's your website for eggs?
Our website is southwestgamebirds.com.
Okay. Let's see. Douglas Brown says, for someone who is new to this, could you tell me the pros and or cons to raising quail?
So the pros are they're very prolific, they're very productive, they're very quiet. So if you're in a city and you have an HOA, that's a huge bonus. They hatch incredibly quickly and they lay eggs incredibly quickly. The cons would be short lifespan. Kind of comes with the territory for a bird that hits maturity quickly. Right. They aren't going to live as long, going to be productive as long as chickens. But there's also some health benefits. We don't make any health claims because we don't want to get into it with the FDA and whatnot. But some folks have claimed that they have chicken egg allergies, and when they tried quail eggs, they didn't see the same detrimental effects. So if you have certain health concerns like that, I know the HDL and LDL cholesterol levels are different in quail eggs as opposed to chicken eggs. So it's something to look into. If you need eggs in your diet, but you have issues with dietary cholesterol or with allergies, my understanding is quail eggs can have great benefits. All the other health claims, like it cures cancer, it helps your vision, I just haven't seen evidence or data for it. But those are some of the pros and cons. And they're just really nice birds. They're fun to raise.
Exactly. Okay, Robert says, if I separate my roos from my hens for a while, how long after reintroducing them will it take for them to begin laying fertile eggs again?
I give them about a week. After 2 weeks, you'll see consistent fertility. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't be surprised if you incubated eggs that were laid a week later. So not if you gathered eggs a week later, because some of those would have been laid that day. But if you begin gathering after about a week, you should get some of those to hatch.
Okay, Nick says, do you have to breed your lines to jumbos and then breed back to keep the line pure but large, or will it lose the pure lineage with the introduction of the jumbo line regardless of breed?
That's a great question. Let me write down your name. You're getting a box of eggs.
Way to go, Nick.
So certain colors you want to outcross fairly often. An example is silver, and Perry Schofield did this historically for years, and it's a great way to maintain silver. Other gene pools are different, and they don't need it. So it really depends on a specific gene pool, whether you've had what's called genetic drift, which will cause a line to slowly deteriorate and lose certain alleles that are important for the health of the population. But yeah, the answer is it really depends. If you have a large enough population to form a proper spiral breeding program, you can breed a close population of birds for decades and never have issues. There's people that have done that with a meat line from the Northwest, 30 plus years, and it's been how it can be. We keep hoping that there's a farmer out there that's done it with Texas A&Ms that we can see, but most of those lines seem to have deteriorated. So something like that, it would need to be outcrossed. And if it's a color line that you're outcrossing, just be careful what you outcross it to. The safest one to do is Pharaoh. If you have a purebred Pharaoh line, you won't introduce any other colors or surprises. But if it's carrying recessive genes, it can be a mess, and it can really ruin a color line for quite a while.
Okay, good question, Nick. Letty Torres says, should my quail have food in their bowl all the time, and how much should I feed them?
It depends on what you're feeding them. So if you're feeding them a traditional game bird layer feed that's formulated for quail, they can eat that free choice. If you're feeding them a starter feed, or something really rich, or you're giving them lots of treats, you'll probably need to limit their feed a little bit so they don't get fat. But keep an eye on their weight. If they're walking around fine and they're healthy and active, then you don't have to worry about it. If they're underweight, then give them some more food. The quail is not going to fall over dead instantly just because it had too much or too little food. You'll see them dive into their food dish if they're hungry, or you'll see them leave it alone if they're full. So they're pretty responsive in that way.
Yep. Okay, Carrie says, I've had quail for about 8 months and I'm looking to add something not readily available in my area. Would your pearl sparkly line be a good mix for the SSCs?
That's a great question. We haven't mixed them with Schofield Silvers on our farm, so I can't actually tell you, in all honesty. I imagine, and I know a couple folks have done it, so it can be done. But I don't know how they would interact genetically. I don't imagine it would make the Schofield Silver line worse, because in the US, a lot of those are prone to some health issues, whereas the German Sparklies are not. So I think it's a good idea to mix them, but I can't tell you what the result would be because I haven't done it.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Blue Donkey Report says, Michael, I will be focusing on breeding jumbo wilds for meat birds. What are your secrets to growing consistently large birds? Thank you, Terry Bartley.
Good question. So when you're breeding for size, we have an advantage in that we're working with a larger population of birds, so we can naturally select the largest and healthiest looking ones and cull heavily. So culling heavily is one of the main things. You want to only pick the very, very best looking birds. The second thing is not to cross them with anything that you're not familiar with, and if you do, only do it with a percentage of your birds so that you can keep the uncrossed ones separate in case you made a mistake. But for instance, with our production lines, the JMF production lines that we maintain, we don't cross them with anything else. We just run a spiral breeding program, and 5-10 years down the line, if they need to have something crossed into them, we'll probably do that in collaboration with JMF. We're not going to just do it haphazardly.
Right.
But yeah, it's very important just to keep genetic lines pure, not mix too many things into them. And if you're not sure if you did something, or you're not sure what bird you're looking at, don't put it in a cage with your jumbo birds. You're trying to keep them.
Okay, Katrina says, what are your energy costs for that setup, or do you have solar?
We had solar at our last location. It nicked a good portion of the energy costs off. In Arizona, electricity is just outrageously expensive. So yeah, we regularly have a 4-figure electric bill just to run all the industrial fans, the industrial pumps, everything that we're running. We do keep the room where the eggs are completely temperature controlled with air conditioning. We run a whole bunch of incubators. So it's just a lot of heating elements for the brooders. So that's what always drives me crazy, is we're working so hard to keep them cool, and then we're fighting what we just did with all those heating elements to keep the little birds warm. So
Right.
we work against ourselves a little bit. We pay for it, but it works out. It's certainly worth it. We like what we're doing.
Okay, Shauna says, hello from Montana. What percentage protein do you use for your layers?
Our layers are on a 20% protein. Um, we actually had them on a 22% protein before, and they did okay. It was from a really big feed mill. Then we redesigned our feed recipe a little bit. We got a custom blend made by Purina Mills, and with specific ingredients that we really liked in that one. Um, we lowered it to 20%. We did a side-by-side test. The birds are actually more productive on that. So it's not a simple answer of what protein percentage should I have, so much as how digestible is the food that I'm giving my birds and how healthy is it for them, how well they on it long term. So if you have a local mill that uses good quality ingredients, don't be scared to go a little lower on the protein and test it out, see how the birds do on it. It certainly paid off for us.
Okay, good. Henriette Bullion says, how much feed are you using per day?
Um, a lot.
Right.
We go through a lot of feed. Feed's one of the main costs when you're raising quail. I think for most poultry, at a commercial level, feed is 80% of your cost. So um, we get our feed in bulk, and we really like the rep at Purina. She's great to work with, and she takes good care of us. And so whenever we need it, it's there within a week.
Cool. Jay Cole says, what is your opinion of adding soy meal to regular game bird crumbles to boost the protein?
I don't think it's necessary. Uh, Soy is probably one of the main ingredients in that feed anyway.
Mhm.
I think a standard poultry feed is something like 95% soy and corn. So I don't know that the birds will get any added benefit from added soy meal. It's a great protein source for them, but if it's already a game bird feed, then I don't imagine that they need it.
Right. Marius says, do you ship overseas? And he's in South Africa.
Uh, Generally, no, but if you're willing to pay for the legal export permits, then absolutely. So we've done a few exports. We toe the line on doing everything above board as best we can.
Sure.
So there's an export permit process. We have to have a veterinarian come and inspect the flock for each export, fill out paperwork. It costs a little bit of money, so you don't want to do it for 50 eggs. But if you need 1,000 eggs and you're starting a business and you want a line that we have, we'll absolutely work with you.
Cool. Henriette says, do you think the white birds are more aggressive than the normal quail?
No, not with ours. So a lot of people report aggression in white birds. Um, some of it is genetics. If you're raising the Texas A&Ms that were known for aggression, a lot more of it is husbandry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you raise the birds properly and you separate the males when they hit maturity from the females, not all of them, but you pull out a percentage of those males so that it's the right ratio, like you would with browns, you're not going to see nearly as many aggression issues due to their sexual behavior. The second thing is the color. The white birds will often stand out from the browns if you have them mixed, or other colors even. And they've also got little spots of brown plumage. So if they've got all white plumage and one red, the other birds might get curious and go and peck at that spot.
Right.
So I think what a lot of people think of as aggression is really just curiosity and often hunger. So if the birds are looking for food, the whites will peck each other to death much sooner than the browns will. If the birds are curious and they don't have enough mental stimulation, you could also see some issues that might look like aggression.
Okay.
But I really think that we don't give white birds a fair rap. They're really good birds. They just got a few things going against them because of their color. So nothing you can't change with a little bit of good husbandry.
Right. Okay, Pat says, I'm interested in breeding. My question is, how likely am I to develop problems from inbreeding if I use pair from one hatching? And how do you recommend a practical approach to preventing this?
Pat, that's a great question. Quail have an unbelievably high inbreeding tolerance. So A lot of folks who raise chickens are very concerned about inbreeding, and when you move into quail, a lot of those same thoughts prevail. Um, Quail do not have the same inbreeding, or sorry, chickens do not have the same inbreeding tolerance as quail, though. So in research, when a laboratory is using quail for an experiment, they will inbreed them for 20 generations successively, just so that they get similar birds that they can compare in their trials. So if a bird can go 20 generations just to be useful for science, you can inbreed them a lot without seeing issues. So what I'd really focus on, instead of avoiding inbreeding altogether, is keeping a larger group together and then selecting the best quality birds. So most issues with quail come from selecting the wrong breeders that have health issues. Some of that's from inbreeding. The majority is just from not selecting the right birds. So if you got a big enough group that you can do a spiral breeding program, or you can cross males from one group with females from another, more power to you. You won't have issues from inbreeding for a longer period of time. Um, but even just straight up inbreeding birds it's a dirty word with people. It's not nearly as much of a dirty word with quail.
Okay, SOS Jones says, is there any way to increase the chance for a flock of quail roosters to coexist peacefully? I have trouble with young roosters in the rooster-only cage getting aggressive, even at around 5 weeks of age.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things you can do. If you have a bachelor pen of male birds, it's really interesting. Quail are visual. So if they can see the ladies, they're going to go crazy. If you take them out of their line of sight, they'll be much calmer. So you can have an entire pen full of males that peacefully coexist. Um, there are a few genetic lines that is not the case for. They will peck each other to death and try to breed with each other. But most quail, you can successfully run a bachelor pen. If you happen to have really, really sexually active male quail and you're trying to run a bachelor pen and they're just beating each other up, give them more space. Try to remove the really aggressive ones, or there's a small chance that it just won't work out. But usually you can make a bachelor pen work. Control it with light, control it with what they can see visually, give them room to escape each other if they need to, and then give them something to mentally stimulate them. Put toys or rocks or plants or something in their cage. A dust bath is great. All those things are good when you're running a bachelor pen and having issues like that.
Yep. Let's see, J. Cole says, do you find any specific wavelength of light better during the brooder stage?
Coturrnix is pretty easy. I know with other species like bobwhites, you have to use red light. With quail, we run white. We only use red light with the really fragile ones like the cinnamons. So yeah, we just run white lights in the brooder. You do not want to use red light when they hit 4 or 5 weeks of age, or they will develop sexually too soon. So red light, it's great when they're little, but if you're getting eggs at 5 weeks, then you got a real problem because that bird developed too quickly. So I'd recommend sticking with white light. The babies do well with light 24 hours a day, whereas the adults do slightly better with a day-night cycle. Although there's lots of commercial breeders that use light 24 hours a day with their adults as well, and they do just fine.
Cool. Katrina says, what is the strangest looking genetics you've hatched?
We were white that had a toe. And that was probably the strangest one that we had. So it had 2 thumbs. But other than that, one other color surprised us. We mixed Falpy with Rue, and we got a bird that looked almost identical to Sandy. So I sent a picture to a few other breeders, and they identified it as Sandy, and I said, trick question. And I showed them a picture of it next to Sandy, and then you could tell the difference. And nobody knew what it was until, so that's a heterozygous phi with Rue. And that just shows you what kind of combinations you can get when you're mixing colors that you might not be able to identify visually if you don't know the history of that bird.
Okay, Mark says, I have 9 hens with 2 males to breed. I don't think they are breeding. They are all of age. I took 2 males to the hens pen. I took the 2 males to the hen's pen. I've seen no breeding activity and no signs of feather loss on the hens. Did you do that?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what you would do if the males aren't breeding. They may just not be doing it in front of you. Um, so I would open up some of those eggs and look for what we call a bullseye.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a small white dot on the egg with a little white circle around it. If all you see is a white dot at the blastocyst site, they're not fertile. If you see that little ring around it, that's a fertilized egg. So you can do that, or you can just throw some in the incubator and see if they're fertile. Um, but yeah, oftentimes you don't see it. It just depends if you got shy males. Um, but I think they're likely doing it behind your back.
I had to put this one up that says, "Hey Michael, thanks for making me realize how long it's been since my high school science classes. Trying to remember the genetics." That was good.
That's
See,
great.
Mark Bryant says, "Should I have used a different cage and put them in it?" Ooh, I don't remember what his. Okay, he was the one.
Yeah, what's that in reference to?
Yeah, that was in reference to the 9 hens with the 2 males, and he's not noticing any breeding activity.
So yeah, I would say just leave them in there for 3 or 4 weeks and then test those eggs. But if they're not isolated, then you won't be able to identify their eggs or what's going on exactly. So
Right.
unless you're asking if it should be a different style of cage, um, but I have to know more about your setup. We use traditional rollout cages, so there's not a lot to distract the birds from breeding. They can find each other fairly easily, and then the eggs are nice and high quality because they roll right out. So it's easy to collect the eggs and keep them separate from everything else. So if your setup's doing something like that, and you should be in good shape to figure out if those are good quality breeders and giving you nice fertility.
Okay, Joseph says, "I have jumbo brown quail for the first time. They are pushing 8 to 9 weeks now. I've received 1 egg about a week ago. Should I be concerned? They are eating a mix of protein, game, corn, and layer feed."
No, I wouldn't be concerned, especially when it's your first time, which I assume it is. Oh, you said that it is. Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried. If you got 1 egg, give them another week or two and see if they all start laying.
Mm-hmm.
It may just have been something that maybe wasn't exactly ideal early on. So if you didn't have the temperature quite right in the brooder or in the incubator even, and something happened that didn't kill the birds, but it stunted their development a little, then it may take them an extra 2 or 3 weeks to start laying. But if you got 1 egg, that's a really good sign that you're doing everything right. So I would just give it time, and most of the time, once you are happy and mature and settled in, you're going to have more eggs than you know what to do with. But you do have to be patient the first time. So there's a small chance if you keep just getting 1 egg a day and you know you've got more hens in there, that you may be right on the brink of having the right conditions. Like maybe you have just enough light for one of the hens to start laying, but not the rest of them. So then you can start fiddling with making adjustments. But if you're already seeing an egg, it's unlikely that you're right on the brink. You probably got good conditions. So I would just leave it and give it a couple of weeks.
Okay. Marius says, "If I put an English white male over a jumbo wild feral female, what can I expect?"
So if that's all they've got, you're going to get a brown bird with the occasional white feather. So English white, it can either hide entirely, it can be a completely brown in the next generation, or you can see a little white on the neck, like on the pictures on that genetics page, or you can see some white primary feathers. You're not going to see a lot of white, you're just going to see a little bit pop up here and there. If you then breed them to each other or back to an English white, half of those will come out white and half of them will come out as carriers.
Okay. Jesse says, "Everyone breeds for true color. Around my area, people only look for the birds to be pretty, so I run mixed color pens. Do you see a problem with that idea if they are all good quality birds?"
I don't think you'll have any problems in the short term. If you're mixing different bloodlines, let's say you've got German pastels in there, you've got somebody's Falbes and somebody else's pearls, and then somebody's tuxedos, and then you throw our German sparklies in there or something, the results are not predictable. When you take gene pools and you mix them, they can interact in ways that are amazing. You can get a hybrid vigor, you can get really big, healthy birds, or you could have less desirable interactions. So, for the most part, quail are quail. You put them all together, you're going to get eggs and chicks. But I can't tell you 100% with 100% certainty exactly what would happen. I suspect that you're just going to get a whole bunch of really pretty birds that are a whole bunch of different colors. So I say more power to you if you want to do that. If you see anything really interesting, I'd love to see it. Send us a picture.
Sure. Brico says, what temperature is the best for baby quail?
95 degrees.
Okay.
If you have a brooder that's open air, give them a little gradient. Set the hot part of the brooder at 100 and make sure the coldest part of the brooder doesn't go below about 90. Brooder controlling temperature entirely. They like about 95 degrees when they're first born.
Okay, SOS Jones says, is there a process I could follow if I wanted to introduce or produce a celadon egg layer in a color of bird that does not lay celadon? Amazing color chart and bird information.
That's a good question. When you're working with celadon, because it is recessive, you can't see it for a generation. So if you mix a random color, or not random, but the color that you select into your celadons, then take their offspring, and I would recommend breeding them back to the celadons so that you can get back to celadon layers as soon as possible. You can just select hens that come out the color you like and breed them back to celadons. You're just working with celadon at that point. That's going to be the easiest way to do it. If not, you're going to be stuck selecting for color and then probably working with them for 1 or 2 more generations to get them breeding celadon again. It's just a pain in the butt because you can't tell when they hatch. You have to wait until they're 6 to 8 weeks old and laying eggs.
Right.
And then the males, you can't tell when they hatch. You have to wait an additional 6 to 8 weeks for them to be fertilizing eggs, mix them with celadons, and then wait an additional 10 weeks for their offspring to start laying eggs before you can really identify if that male has 1 copy of celadon or 2.
Wow.
So my advice would be keep those to themselves. Once you get celadon hens that are the color you like, just take them and use those with your other celadons, and then you've got celadon paired up first, and then you can work on color after that.
Cool. Okay, Alexa says, what do you think the best ratio for hen to roux is for breeding?
It depends on your line. So well, 2 things. It depends on your line, and it depends on how much space you give them. So if you're running a production cage and you're maxed out at 5 birds per square foot, you'll want a lower percentage of males. If it's a small cage. If it's a large cage, you'll actually need a few more. So I know with production lines, we run coveys of 25 birds, so it's 20 hens and 5 males. If we were to up that and put them in a larger cage at the same square footage, we would probably need to move that ratio to 3 to 1 instead of 4 to 1. If you do 100 birds plus, it needs to be 2 to 1 on meat production birds. On colors, they're often smaller and more active, so 1 male can fertilize more hens. You don't need as many males. And then if you were bantam lines, and those are just like wild birds, you only need 1 of them for every 10 hens. So it's a range, but it depends on the birds you're working with, and you really have to just watch your birds, see if the females are in good shape. If they're getting beat up by the males, then you need to adjust the ratio a little bit. On the other hand, if your females all look super happy and fat and the eggs aren't fertilized, then you got to do the opposite.
Right.
Throw some more males in there for
them. William says, future plans for the farm? Yeah, I'll be nice.
Yeah, we got lots of future plans. You're not getting a box of eggs for that question, William. Sorry.
Well, William.
No, we're planning to release each color. We'll probably release some before we have them pure, just to get them out there. But definitely whenever we have something pure, we'll release that. Um, and then we're working on a couple different meat and egg lines. There's a lot of potential in some of them. If any of those come to fruition, we'll release those as well. And then um, other than that, we're just looking to grow slowly and keep the quality up and uh, not grow too quickly. We want to be able to make sure that we serve our customers first and we can give them what they order when they order it. We're not making people wait too long.
Right.
If you order eggs on southwestgamebirds.com, you can select which date you want them shipped to you. We want to make sure that we can always stick to the date that we offer. So that's really important to us to let people know what they're getting and when they're getting it, and then to do our best to stick to our product.
Cool. Maria says, when breeding for good temperament, does it diminish the sex drive of the male?
It can. That's an excellent question. Um, it depends. So if you're breeding them to be very calm, uh, often sex drive is correlated with how active a bird is.
Mm-hmm.
So the craziest male, like I said, in those bantam lines that we work with, that we need one male for every 10 hens, you wouldn't want that as a pet. They're not fun to raise. They're like wild birds. They're not friendly. So if you want something that's fun to raise, you are going to need more males for a covey of the same number of hens.
Okay. Alexis says, how much greens and vegetables in addition to food are safe if your quail also get grit?
I don't know the answer to that. I imagine you could give them as much as they want to eat. Quail are really good at identifying what they should and shouldn't eat. So if you gave them greens and gave a big old pile of mealworms, they're naturally going to gravitate toward the mealworms because that's a really great protein for them. So as long as you're not giving them something that is going to make them fat, I think the sky's the limit. You can give them lots of variety. Quail can eat almost anything that people can eat. So it's great to be able to give them table scraps and whatnot. And like you said, you're already giving them grit, so it sounds like you know what you're doing. Those birds are well cared for, and I don't think there's a limit on greens. I know people that feed their quail or chickens fodder as 90% of their diet or more, and they do great. So yeah, they're your quail. Give them what you want, and I'm sure they'll thank you.
Okay, Samantha says, can too much light drive a quail to beat their heads off the wall? Say putting a brooder and older birds in the same room, or should you always separate the two?
So if too much light means the daylight night cycle, you can leave lights on 24 hours a day. There's a lot of people that think it's inhumane. If the quail are used to it, you can see it in the temperament of the birds, how active they are. If they're beating each other up or jumping off the walls, you may need to give them a little more of a dark cycle. But if they're raised like that, they usually don't have an issue with it.
Okay. Brooke says, how long did you study these breeds to come to your conclusions with the information gathered?
Well, we've been doing it since 2017. So I like research. My wife is a chemist, so she does a lot of research for me. And we love reading about them. We like reading academic papers. We like talking to other breeders. So really, it depends on which birds we're talking about. Some of them I don't have a conclusion yet. So for example, those red birds in the German sparklies, I don't know what they are. There's something else in there. It makes them really beautiful, but it doesn't look like the Egyptians we have. So something like that I don't have a conclusion on, and I'll be the first one to say it.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones that we're fairly confident on, I would say with genetics, nothing's ever 100% certain. But when I see consistent results a few times, then I'll kind of put that one aside as something that I know, and we'll breed those the way that we think is best. And I think we got a lot out of our mentorship program with James Marine Farms. we also got a lot out of some of the other breeders we've met since then. And there's some people out there that know way, way, way more about genetics and colors than I do. And I just try and learn as much as I can from them.
Sure.
It's been fun. It's been an adventure.
Okay, Carissa says, my quail keep getting cut on their feet in the pen. Any suggestions?
Um, it depends on what's in their pen. If they're on some kind of sharp gravel, or if it's a wire floor pen, I would give them something soft to lay in. Give them a sand bath, or dust bath. Give them an area that if they're in a cage, you can put some pegboard in there, and they'll rest on that when they need to.
Mm.
But yeah, take out whatever's sharp on the floor. If you're using wire and there's a lot of burrs on the wire, they can cut their feet and they can get infected. And it's not pretty. So I highly recommend the vinyl coated wire if you're using a wire cage, and then giving them somewhere to rest their feet.
Okay. Skynet says, can you suggest a cage for the first timer? I'm new to quail.
We've heard good things about the Wynola Ranch cages. We've also heard good things about the hatching time cages. GQF is kind of the standard that's been used for years. We started out with those. But if you're on a budget, I would make your own. They're not that hard to make.
Right.
You can find designs online. I think, Terry, you've got a really good one. And there's lots of people that will help you out. So keep it between 8 and 10 inches tall, and that'll keep them from having issues if they get spooked. And then I would say make a third of the cage some kind of a soft area where they can lay down or dust bathe, and then have 2/3 of it be some kind of wire that makes cleaning easy, unless you're happy to clean all the time. But I know I don't like cleaning, so as much manure as I can get to drop through is
let's see. Micah says, when you're trying to breed for certain colors, how big of a study group should you use? Is it best to keep it small? I'll drop my pen.
Yeah, so if you don't understand the color, you got to track each individual bird. If you understand the color and you're trying to offer them as a bloodline, I don't like to have anything less than 10 or 20 birds in a group. So if it's a collection and I've separated the collection into 6 different colors or something like that, I like to have at least 10 in each of those color groups. And I don't like to have them inbred in small numbers like that. So we'll cross them out and then make new breeding groups each year. But yeah, when you're first studying something or you're crossing something with something else, it's definitely important to track each individual bird. If you throw 2 birds that look the same in a cage with 8 hens that all look the same, and you're trying to study them, you will never know which bird fertilized which bird and what was the result of that particular cross. So we've made those mistakes before, learned from them, and wasted a lot of time doing it. So we track each individual bird now.
Okay,
But,
Brooke
that's a great question.
says, do you ever have any problems with parasites with the quail on natural ground? How often do you clean their substrate, if any?
So we don't keep them on natural ground, and it's for that reason. Arizona has all kinds of nasty things. You think it's the desert and nothing can live out here. Well, that's true for the most part, but everything bad can live out here. So we've got all kinds of parasites, all kinds of fungus. We've got poultry mites and poultry lice and all kinds of things on the ground. So we don't use natural ground to keep the quail in our facility. There's a epoxy floor underneath that we can completely sanitize with bleach between each 6-week batch. And so there's no chance. The only thing they're on is the pine shaving floor. But what I'd recommend is eye on them. If you have a friend who's a veterinarian or knows about poultry that can look at them if you have any concerns, reach out to them. But most quail are fairly disease resistant. If you have experience with chickens and you're not having issues, then you're probably not going to have issues with your quail.
All right. We are coming up on, well, it's about 20 to 9. Can you stay another 20 minutes, Michael, or? Are we pushing it?
I'm good if you're good.
Okay,
I
we're
bulked
gonna
up the
go to
whole night.
9 o'clock, whether or not we get through all these questions, because I hate keeping Michael out this late. Well, it's not late where you're at, but it's getting late.
No, it's not.
Letty says, "Can I have males like 10 or more living together?"
Yeah, absolutely. We have several groups with 10 or more males together. So if I see a male that looks really great and I don't have any females to throw in with him, he'll go in one of our bachelor cages until I've got a use for him.
Right.
But yeah, bachelor cages are great. What you don't want to do is have 10 males and then throw one hen in there, because that'll be a disaster.
Right. All right. Todd, sorry, says, "How often do you need to give oyster shell?"
It depends. If you're feeding them table scraps and leafy greens and fodder and you're doing your own feed, I would give them oyster shell free choice. If you're feeding them a 3% calcium formulated quail breeding ration, you don't ever have to give them oyster shell. So they'll usually only eat as much as they need, but if you offer that to a feed that has it mixed in, it's not going to do them any good. You especially don't want to offer it to them while they're developing. So this is only for laying hens. But yeah, I don't. It just depends on how you're raising them and what you're feeding them.
Okay. Raymond says, "Opinions on using kitty kibble in order to increase the protein levels of the feed. Also, options on supplements to provide."
So full disclosure, we don't use cat food or any kind of kitty kibble. But I've heard good things about it. It's cats are carnivores, and so they're mostly meat based. And so if you use cat food for quail, it's going to be a good quality protein source. I wouldn't want to make that their entire diet because it's designed for cats. It's not designed for birds. But most of the things that cats eat, birds can eat too. Um, I don't see any issue with that. Other things you can supplement with are mealworms. That's a great protein source. You can also supplement with black soldier fly larvae. Black soldier flies you only want to give to adult birds that are already developed because they have a really high calcium percentage. So just be aware of that. Only give those to adults. But yeah, I think those are the two most popular, and you can raise those yourself, or you can buy them dried at the feed store usually.
Yep. Okay, Mike says, "How many hours do you wait to open the incubator after the chicks start hatching?" I go 24.
Yeah, I go 24, and that's what I recommend. So if we see chicks hatching, and we know the schedule in our incubator, so we know at about 16 days and 8 hours we're going to see birds starting to hatch out. So then after 17 days and 8 hours, we'll open it up, pull them out. Anything that didn't hatch doesn't get included in our breeding program. If we're doing a meat pen and we're going to just raise them for meat, I will close the stores back after I remove the chicks and pull anything out that hatches the next day as well. But those never get included in the breeding program. They hatch late. We call them slackers, but they do grow into nice big birds and they make good meat. So it just depends on what you're doing. If you want to raise them for breeding, just take those ones that hatch within 24 hours. If they're expensive shipped eggs and you want to get every one out of them that you can, then take a look at 24 hours. If most of them hatch, great, pull them out, and then close your incubator back up, see what else happens. I'm always surprised at what happens with shipped eggs, because what happens with an egg as it ages is once it hits about 14 days old, at 10 to 14 days old, just because of the age of the egg and the damage that occurs from aging, the bird will hatch about 24 hours later. So it's not an exact linear function, but I'm sure a 7-day-old egg will hatch a little later than a 3-day-old egg. So you see a little bit of that. And I think that shipping exacerbates that. So when you damage an egg in shipping, you can sometimes see really inconsistent hatches. So what may hatch, great within 24 hours on our farm might take 2 days to hatch after it's shipped. You just never know. But that's what I do. Wait the 24 hours and then go from there.
Okay. Brooke says, "What are your goals for the future, and what do you breed most for? Weight, egg size, production, color, or all?"
All. So it depends on which birds. So, for example, we're working with calico right now. and we are breeding that exclusively for color because we have so few of them.
Mhm.
So when something's that rare and it's difficult to replace, um, we take what we can get. So what we've got right now is a bunch of really, really small birds and beautiful, but I'm taking everything we can. Something else like our pearl fees, um, we are breeding those primarily for meat size, and then secondarily for egg size, and tertiary for color. So eventually we'll get the color right. Um, but if you take an impure pearl fee, um, you can get 18 different phenotypes. So they can match all kinds of things. But those are something where we saw the potential for meat. We're going after meat first, and then we're happy with that, and then everything else. So it just depends. Some things, whatever's most important to us for that particular line, we'll breed for that. We've got some golden Manchurians. I saw that some of them came out a really nice burnt orange, and then some of them had a lot of white in the underlying plumage. So we separated those out. So we're breeding primarily for color on both of those, but some of them will be a light golden Manchurian, some dark. If you order golden Manchurians from us, you'll see some of both of those, and they're fairly easy to distinguish once they're mature, because the light ones really have become a lot lighter than the dark ones. So it just depends on what you want to breed for. I like doing color, but a lot of the money is in meat, so we end up doing that as well.
Okay. Um, Larry says we have found that fewer than 3 birds per square feet leads to fighting. Have you found this true?
So we don't raise fewer than 3 birds per square feet. So I imagine if we did, we might have the same results that you're having, but I can't speak to it because we're not doing that personally.
Okay. Alexis says, do you recommend certain protein for all quail, or do you have one for breeders and a different protein for meat birds?
Yeah, so for our breeders, we use 20% protein. I recommend 20 to 22%. For meat birds, it depends on how fast you want to grow them out. If you want to grow them as quickly as possible, Purine makes, there's a handful of other companies that make 28% protein feeds. If you want to grow them out a little slower, that's what we do. We raise them out at 26%. We're not slaughtering those birds until they're 6 to 8 weeks old for meat. And the reason for that is we're in a niche meat industry where we provide the birds for food for birds of prey and carnivores like that. They don't want a 5-week-old bird that's been pumped full of protein and has no fat or fat soluble nutrients. They want a bird with high hemoglobin levels. They want fat soluble nutrients, manganese, copper, potassium. They want all that in the meat of the bird and the fat of the bird. So we grow them out a little slower. It's a little more expensive, but we were just raising them for ourselves. Probably just full of protein because I'm an American. I like tender poultry meat, and that's that's what I would usually want to eat.
Okay. Larry says, what could be the problem with wild color birds attacking my Texas A&Ms or white spot birds?
They're probably hungry, or the male to female ratio is off a little bit. If they're really going after the whites, let's say you have just a few whites with a whole bunch of browns. We always joke that quail are a little bit racist. They'll go after whatever's different. Especially a white bird, it's so light compared to the browns. That might be it. They may just be fascinated with a little black spot on the back of their head or something like that. Quail are visual, and when they're hungry, they start pecking everything they can see. So just keep that in mind. If they're well fed and they've got enough space, they'll be fine. The birds that are getting bullied in this state, give them a spot to hide, an enclosure that's big enough for them to run away, and then they'll probably be just fine.
Okay. Andrew says, do you recommend running electrolytes all year round? If not, would there be an issue?
Running electrolytes. I assume that just means supplementing the water with electrolytes.
Most likely.
It depends. If you're feeding them filtered water or reverse osmosis filtered water, you definitely want to add some electrolytes into their water. If you're feeding them water from the tap, or if you're on a well, then you don't have to worry about it. But I don't think the time of year really matters. If they're in a hot environment and you're giving them a really purified water, then it would matter because they're drinking a lot more. But normally they get enough electrolytes from their food, so you don't have to worry about mixing that in.
Okay. All right. Quail Ma'am says, when you start breeding and create a brand new color, how many generations do you raise or test before you feel comfortable offering them for sale?
It depends. So that's actually a really good question. Uh, Let me write your name down. Quill, ma'am. Um, if I understand the genetics and I know exactly what it was crossed to, we're comfortable offering them after one generation. So if we do one test hatch and they hatch exactly like I predict they're going to, um, those will go right on our website. So a good example is Golden Manchurian. You can tell from the day they hatch. You may have an Italian sneak in there if you don't have all of the females selected properly, but you'll never get a Pharaoh bird. And so when we're selling Golden Manchurians, they should breed 100% true. Um, if we see the occasional Italian, we'll pull them right over our side until we figure out what's going on. But you're certainly never going to see a Pharaoh, and we can tell that from the very first hatch. Some of the other colors, like all these sparklies and some of the new designer colors is what I call them if they're something that we crossed with something else. Um, I I won't be comfortable until I've seen them for 2 or 3 generations. So we'll be working on those for 1 to 2 years minimum before I'm comfortable selling them. So we've built up a really big collection over the last 2 to 3 years, but really the only way to get some of those from us is if you order the hatchery's choice, because then I'll throw anything in there. Because I'm not self-conscious about is that going to hatch true, or am I not comfortable selling that quite yet. Um, but we just try to be as honest as we can in our listings. If something's not breeding true yet, or if we've mixed multiple things age to make a collection, we'll say so. But yeah, if we want to sell something that breeds true, I need to see it for a while and be completely comfortable with it
Hmm.
before I'll claim that it breeds true.
Okay. Larry says, will the sparkly and wild be feather sexable?
Um, Sparkly and wild. Uh, Wild is always feather sexable. Sparkly, every variety that we have seen is feather sexable. Um, I'm sure there are some things that you can cross into it that would cause it to not be feather sexable, but um, right now they're all feather sexable. Trick is you have to know what you're looking at because you will not get the same plumage patterns as you get without sparkly. So we've seen folks posting them on Facebook or emailing us, and they think that a male looks like a female because it has that diamond pattern on all the plumage on its chest, and it's really the tone of the feather, and you have to be familiar with what that color would look like on a female to be able to compare it to a male. But yes, they're all feather sexable if you know what you're looking for.
Okay. Mika says, is medicated or non-medicated starter feed best for chicks?
Um, so if you're just medicating with amprolium, then uh, it's it's kind of six of one, half dozen of the other. Um, we have it in ours because we are raising the quail on the ground. They can eat their own feces, and we don't want that to cause gut issues. Um, as far as antibiotics, I don't recommend those for quail chicks. I think it's unnecessary, and we don't like to over medicate our birds. So I don't think it's necessary for the most part.
Okay. Alexa says, thoughts on fermenting your feed for quail?
I think it's a lot of work, but I think it's great. So anything that'll make their food more digestible is good in my book. So quail thrive on fermented feed. I
Yeah.
wouldn't do it with chicks because it's really important to keep them warm, and if they get wet from eating more of a slosh instead of a dry feed, that could cause issues. But if you're talking about fermenting feed for your adults and they're staying clean and dry and they have good quality plumage, I think that's great. More power to you.
Okay. Aaron says, what do you do to control feed waste?
We're really bad at that. It's an excellent question. Um, and it's important to control it because if you waste feed, A, you're wasting money, and B, you're inviting rodents into your barn. So the first thing we do is we have a really thorough rodent pest control system in place. Um, and the second thing we do is we clean out the entire barn once a week. So all the spilled feed that gets onto the floor or gets into the manure pans gets hauled out. We pile it up in a big pile, and then we actually have a group of guinea fowl that will go through that, and they live off of the spilled feed. And those are the birds we use for our personal eggs. I love guinea fowl eggs. We don't sell them. We don't sell the birds. It's just that's our thing. And we said, look, we're wasting all this feed. We might as well have some free birds and free eggs out of it.
There you
So
go.
they do that. They keep the rodent population down outdoors. They keep the fly population down outdoors. Other pests they'll eat, and so that's what we do with it. You can also compost it. Some people try to reuse it. I'm not a big fan of picking feed off the floor or off the ground and then putting it back in the feed troughs. I don't think it's sanitary, so we don't go that route.
Okay. Folks, Family Game Bird says, what is the best way to outcross silvers with?
Just go with some purebred birds. If you got a nice jumbo pharaoh, that's what Peter Schofield has always done. It's not going to introduce too much else to it. You'll usually be able to maintain whatever other underlying colors are in there. You can take anything you want and cross it to silver. But if you want to know what you're working with and you want to breed toward just pure silver, or if you want to have a bunch of heterozygous silver birds that you can breed together with browns to get 50% silver and 50% browns, I think that's a great goal. But yeah, I'd stick to a production line. I would not breed whites with silvers. I wouldn't breed anything with a recessive gene. I wouldn't breed root because that kind of overpowers silver sometimes. So yeah, I would just stick to the basic plumage patterns. Your fawn, your extended brown, pansy, calico if you can get a hold of it, or sparkly should all be nice results with silver.
Alrighty. Nathan said a small percentage of my jumbo wilds have had vent blowout. Is this common? Could it be something lacking in their feed?
It may be from feeding them too high a protein feed. If a hen is trying to lay an egg that's larger than her oviduct, you can have higher rates of that. It's really sad when you see it. It's a horrible way for a bird to die. But what you can do is make sure that they don't sexually mature too quickly. So if you need to have the lights turned off for a while, wait till they're at least 10 weeks old to make them start laying. You should have better results there. Some of it, unfortunately, comes from poor quality breeding. So if you are not selecting for low levels of prolapse, creep into your line, unfortunately. So what we tend to do is when we're picking our breeders for the successive generation, we won't select breeders from new layers. We'll let them get to 6 to 8 months of age before we start actually keeping them for our own breeding program, because then any of them that prolapsed will be naturally culled from the breeding program. So it's just a natural way to increase longevity, a natural way to lower your incident of prolapse. There's some things that you can do to treat it if you catch it early enough as well, if you want to try and save your bird. But yeah, definitely don't make them mature too early. Don't make them start laying eggs too early. It's one of the things people get excited about with quail, but it's not necessarily good for the bird. So let them grow up nice and slow. Trust me, if you wait an extra 2 weeks to make your bird start laying eggs, the bird's going to thank you and reward you for it.
Alrighty. Andrew says regarding color, this is going to be the last question, by the way, because we are at 9 o'clock right now. Andrew says regarding colors and development, do you stick to the idea of 3 generations of correct color / pattern to be considered true, or do you go for a longer generation breed out?
It 100% depends on the color. So if we're familiar with what it was crossed to or what it came from, we only need 1 generation. There's certain things that will always breed true, and there's some things that if we know where it came from and that there's a recessive gene, for instance, that's known to be in that line, we'll have to do a test on each individual bird that's in that program. So I don't like doing that. I like to just pull from easier birds to work with. But yeah, if it just depends on how familiar we are with them. But yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. If you see it consistently for 3 generations, then you usually know what you're working with. It's unlikely that you've got a recessive floating around, but we just always keep an eye out for it. If we see one, then we know what we're dealing with, and we know to pull that out and to start over. But once you got something pure and it keeps breeding pure, it's always going to keep breeding pure for the most part.
Okay, cool. All right, guys, that is it for the questions. So now for what most of you have been waiting for. Michael, if you want to read off your list of the 5 people that you chose, I'm going to write them down also. If Michael calls your name, guys, email me your shipping information to terry@coturrnixcorner.com. I will make sure it gets forwarded over to Michael, and I'm pretty sure he will be sending out tracking numbers to these guys.
Yep.
So make sure you also include an email address. So go ahead, Michael.
All right. We're going to go with Jesse Mills for one of these boxes, and we'll pick them at random, but we will let you know which one you got. So that'll be the first one.
Okay.
Quail ma'am, I loved your question. You're also a winner. Congratulations. Micah Reynolds, congratulations, you're another winner. I can't even read my own handwriting. Is it Nick Dora?
It is.
Is that how you say it?
Yep.
Congratulations, you're a winner today. And then I'm on the fence between, is it SOS Jones and Maria Nadal, so we're just going to up it to 6 boxes. Congratulations, both of you.
Okay, SOS Jones, and who else?
And I believe it's Maria Nadal. So I apologize if I botched any of your names. I can't read my own writing sometimes, especially when I'm scrambling to write things down. So
yeah, I have that problem too. All right, cool. So
yeah,
you guys, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I was gonna say, you want them to just get in touch with you with all their shipping information, and then
or unless you want to give us an email address and they can just contact you directly, that would be fine also.
Let's do that. So if you're on the list of names I just read, email info@swgamebirds.com, and just put the word winner in the subject line, and we'll get you set up with those eggs.
Okay, cool. The person that I chose who is going to get the Coturrnix Corner tumbler is Brooke. I'm going to spell your last name because I don't know how to pronounce it. Mewes. So Brooke, if you will send me your shipping information to terry@coturrnixcorner.com, I will get that out ASAP. So guys, I want to thank everybody who stuck around tonight. We've had pretty much over 100 people all night long watching, so that's really good. We had some great questions from you guys, and Michael, I can't say enough for you sticking around. It was so interesting and so educational. I mean, I learned a lot of stuff tonight, so I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
And you almost talked me into getting back into some colored birds, so you may be getting an order. So guys, thanks again. I really appreciate it. Michael, hang around. I want to talk to you a minute before you go. But everyone else, we will see you next week right back here at, I forgot the date, next week Tuesday at 7 p.m. where Zach from My Shire Farm will be here. So everyone have a great night, and we'll see you next week.